long story short, there was 3 days where I didn't sleep at all. God was going to change me. And the way he did that was to bring me to my knees spiritually. And I had 3 days of no sleep. And I found myself at 2 o'clock in the morning on top of Cuesta Ridge yelling at God. What are you doing to me? Wow. What is going on?
Hello, this is Mark Sobowitz with the Clarion Voice. Today we are pleased to have as our guest Jerry Dallons, who is a longtime resident of Paso Robles and a new brother in Christ to me. And Jerry, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here, Mark. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about today, and I just decided I should probably get a little bit of my testimony and then give you how I arrived to where I am today.
Okay,
so that's
very
what
good.
We're going to talk about here.
Well, then tell us about yourself a little bit, a little brief synopsis.
Moved to Paso Robles when I was 10 years old. I was from the South LA area in Palos Verdes, and so I was a city boy. And at 10 years old, my dad decided to move the family up to Paso Robles, move the family business, everything else, so I ended up in Paso Robles. As a 10-year-old, I'm looking around because we lived a couple of miles out in the country, and this is all new and unfamiliar to me. As I started school as a fifth grader in Paso Robles at Georgia Brown School, and my teacher was Mr. Franklin, who ended up in the future, unbeknownst to me at the time, he would be the deacon that I was under at the church that I eventually gave my heart to Jesus in. And 2 weeks after arriving in Paso Robles, there was a class outing, a field trip, and we went out to the Franklin Ranch, and lo and behold, the topic was ranching, and there was branding and castration. So this was my eye-opener experience of country life, right. 2 weeks after being a city kid from Southern California. Growing in Paso Robles was much different than it is today. My graduating class was 156. You knew everyone in your class. And, the normal thing was everything evolved around the community and so forth. There was three stoplights back in Paso Robles back in the day, 7,000 people. And the normal thing on a Friday night after I graduated from high school, well, let me rephrase that. I soon married my high school sweetheart. I was 19. I was divorced at 19. And so I went in the military, spent a little time there, and then came out and hung out with my friends. And the normal routine on a Friday night was to go to the football game if it was football season. And after the football game, we would head for Lake Nacimiento with our ski boat. And yes, Coors beer was once $1.26 a six-pack. I knew that very well. And I wasn't a bad kid growing up. I was just lost. I had no sense of direction. So I hung out with my friends. That was my life. It was pretty constant. Every Friday, we would head to the lake and go skiing when the weather was good. And I remember one week, I'm talking to my friend, and I said, normal routine this weekend? He says, no, I'm going to go to church. I said, church? He said, yeah, I'm going to go to church. Well, I didn't know at the time, but his mother, who was a very devout Christian, went to Grace Baptist Church on Kristen Road, and she was hosting some girls from LA Baptist College from the singing group because there was an evangelistic week going on at Grace Baptist Church, and Randy sort of had his eye a little bit on one of the girls, so he wanted to go to church. Not knowing the whole story, I looked at him and I'm lost. Well, what do I do now? I said, can I go with you? And he said, sure. So it was a 3-night deal, a Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. Evangelistic week. They had an evangelist and the singing group from LA Baptist College. Long story short, second night there, I gave my heart to Christ. I'm up at the front weeping, and didn't know what an impact that was going to be in my life. It changed my life upside down. I mean, it really did. For the better, but it was life-changing. Now remember, this is 1980. I'm 25 years old, divorced. And I still ran around a little lost. Not, okay, I can't do what I'd been doing. My friend wasn't doing what he was going to do anymore because he ended up marrying that girl.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
yeah. So, long story short, 7 months later, I found myself at Christian Heritage College in El Cajon, California, which is just east of San Diego. And it was the input that I needed at the time, being 25 years old, and I had to play catch up in my Christian walk. So I was getting big doses of the book of Romans, which is big for Baptists. And of course, it gave me a foundation for my Christian belief, why I believed what I did, and so forth. And I was fortunate enough to have a few really well-known teachers like Dr. Tim LaHaye, and of course, the Institution for Creation Research was there. So I got my creationism down pat and everything else. And I spent just under a year there, that's all. But it was the foundation I needed at the time.
Was there any influences at home from your parents that helped you or gain perspective as far as your walk is concerned? As far as their examples, to you?
No, not really. My dad was not a religious man, and I was being pretty much raised by my father at the time. I spent a little time with my mother. From a divorce situation, my parents. My mom lived down south in Corona, so I went there and lived with her for a year and a half during high school, so I got to know her. She had some religious background, but she didn't go to church at the time and so forth, so there was no really input there. My father, interestingly enough, his middle name is Noel. He was a Christmas baby, but yet he had no religious belief and things like that. On the second hand, my father, brilliant man, had a lot of ethics. My father, he worked hard. He was a good role model for me as far as working hard. You don't buy new things, you fix old things and make them work again. And so I got to do good things with my hands from my father. He was a great employer here in the North County. He employed many people, and he was very fair with his employees. He was tough on them because he expected a lot from them, but he paid them well, and he was always very honest and had a high level of integrity. For a man that was, had no religious upbringing and things like that, it was part of it. It was tough on me on certain things, but in areas, I remember my father as just being a lot of good in my life. When I was going through it, it wasn't always good. But in hindsight, I look back in that and I go, well, I'm this way because of my father, because I learned that high value off my father. So as I gotten older, yes, my father had a lot of influence on me in a very positive way. Anyhow, go ahead.
How has your walk progressed from the point that you were baptized to today? I mean, where has that taken you as far as I know that you have the gift of prophecies, for example. Where did that all come about? As far as your walk is concerned.
Well, interestingly enough, being at the Baptist church, because when I came back, I started going there and so forth, and that was soon going to change. Of course, a conservative Baptist church, there weren't much use of the gifts. That had ceased, and again, prior to that, before becoming Christian, I did a lot of sound engineering or being around sound engineering for my father. We did the sound engineering for and the sound systems for the fair. So when all the big time performers came through, I got to be around that. So I had another thing that I learned from my father, which was sound engineering. And unbeknownst to me, that would have a great effect on me in the future again. But at the time when I came back from college, back to Paso Robles, I didn't do any sound engineering because I was going and attending a denomination and a church that didn't really believe much in rock and roll, drums and all that stuff. So I put all that on the back burner, and it was sort of sad because it was part of who I was a little bit, But I started dating a girl from Morro Bay, and this is about 1982 now. And she went to a charismatic church. And I remember going over to her house, and her mother would be in the background there in another room, and she had a harpsichord, and she would be singing in the Spirit. And I won't get into the theological yes or no of singing in the Spirit,
Right.
you know, but she was doing it by herself, and I had no problem with that. But I remember ridiculing her mom sometimes because she was doing something that was foreign to me as a Baptist. I dated the girl for 7 months, and I kept on being intrigued, though, with her mother and the charismatic belief and things like that. Long story short, there was 3 days where I didn't sleep at all. God was going to change me. And the way he did that was to bring me to my knees spiritually. And I had 3 days of no sleep, and I found myself at 2 o'clock in the morning on top of Cuesta Ridge yelling at God. What are you doing to me? Wow. What is going on? If we progress another hour, I came off of Cuesta Peak knowing I had a prayer language. I had received the gift of tongues, and I'm not saying that was, you have to have the gift of tongues, but for me, that was my introduction into a personal life as a charismatic or a charismatic believing person. Next day, I went to the girl's house. We had been dating for 7 months, and we both had revelation. She had and I had, and we were like, hey, I got something to share with you. And she said, oh, I got something to share with you. We had both received revelation that though we were going to be great friends, we were not supposed to pursue a marriage. This was not to be. And as much as I knew that this was true, I was saddened, you know, so I had to figure out, what am I going to do that night? And I decided I better go with some people because I had started going with her to church, and she was going to a Vineyard Christian Fellowship.
I see.
So I decided I better go and commit to go with a few other people so instead of staying at home, you know, moping in my sorrow. And there was a night, we called them back then, we called them celebrations. About every 2 months, there'd be a celebrations, and all the vineyard churches on the Central Coast would get together at one geographical area, and we would have a night of prolonged worship and maybe a little teaching and getting to pray for one another and operating in gifts of the Spirit. There was a, you know, eye-opener to me. I went, changed my life again.
How has that changed you?
It was my next step in my walk of operating in gifts of the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And long story short, going ahead again a little bit, this is about end of 1983, 1984. I remember attending my first Wimber event, John Wimber. And John Wimber is considered the father of the expansion of the Vineyard movement, though Ken Gullickson was actually the founder of the Vineyard. But John is attributed to being the one that expanded the Vineyard worldwide.
Hey, did you like what you just saw? Well, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell so that you can get notifications of future videos.